Afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Daily Politics. The government outlines plans to frame and shame young yobs in their latest attempt to crack down on antisocial behaviour. We'll hear from the Home Secretary, Jackie Smith.
Gordon Brown's troubles continue as Labour's leader in Scotland insists her call for an independence referendum is not out of kilter with the Prime Minister. We'll have the latest from Edinburgh.
If a week's a long time in politics, how about a decade? A top US commentator gives us his views on how Britain's changed in the last 10 years.
And the TV historian Adam Hart-Davis will be here to explain why he's backing calls for people to torpedo supermarkets in favour of buying in local shops instead. But is the idea realistic?
I don't live in London. I live in a very rural area. And we have a local supermarket. It's the only supermarket I have for 15 miles. So I like it very much, thank you.
Oh, that coming up this Thursday in the next half hour. With us for the duration, Stryker Maguire. Crazy name, crazy guy. Contributing editor of the US magazine Newsweek. Welcome back to the Daily Politics.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you. He's saving up for a tie. No, he's American.
We're going for a no-tie break.
Exactly. Joe's not wearing a tie.
She will be shortly. Now, as we go on air, this row over what Labour's leader in Scotland, actually, she's not really Labour's leader in Scotland. That would be Gordon Brown. She's leader of the Scottish Parliamentary Group in Holyrood. What did she say or didn't say about a referendum on independence? It's getting another public airing. Who would think that Scotland could be the lead story in this morning's Daily Telegraph? Now, it's First Minister's questions in Edinburgh this morning. It's a bit like PMQs. And members of the Scottish Parliament are getting ready to see Wendy Alexander. She's the leader of the Labour Parliamentary Party in Holyrood, to go face-to-face with the First Minister of Scotland and Scottish Nationalist leader Alex Salmond. So we're going to keep across that and bring you the best clips later in the programme. In the meantime, Stryker, it's another fine mess, isn't it?
Everything can be a fine mess. And in this climate,
everything goes pear-shaped.
Absolutely. You remember there was a time, this is a long time ago, but back in the early days of the Blair government, the first Blair government, remember, it was like nothing could go wrong. No. Oh, $1 million pound contribution from,
Mr. Eccleston.
Exactly.
Yes.
No problem.
Now they want to shoot the messenger.
And now Wendy Alexander, who is the best friend of the Prime Minister, they're trying to say saying the same thing. But no one else thinks the same.
And the brother, the sister of one of his
closest confidants,
exactly,
Mr. Alexander.
Exactly. Yeah.
Worse than that, they're from Paisley.
Who else lives
No
in
comment.
Paisley?
Who else is from Paisley? Can't think. Anyway, good to have you.
Thanks.
Now, here's a quick brain teaser relating to our guest, American journalist Stryker Maguire. And the question is, which US state holds the next Democratic primary? A key question here. Is it A, Montana, B, Oregon, or C, West Virginia? And, of course, this is just a bit of fun, but we will get Stryker to give us the correct answer at the end of the show. And if you want to send us your comments, get emailing about any of today's stories to daily.politics@bbc.co.uk. And, of course, we'll read some of those thoughts out later in the show.
That's a good question, actually. It's not easy, is it?
No.
We're running out of states.
I know. Yes, they are.
We're running out of states.
No hints.
No hints?
No.
At least Obama won Guam. And people voted. Now, a week after Labour's drubbing in the local elections, and it was a week ago, last Thursday, the government's attempts at a relaunch, another relaunch, are supposedly in full swing. You may not have noticed. Today it's the turn of the Home Secretary to announce a new initiative. She's proposing to, quote, turn the tables on young troublemakers who ignore warnings about their antisocial behaviour. You may have heard it before. It seems antisocial behaviour is again at the top of the political agenda. Jackie Smith's speech comes a day after Boris Johnson, he's the new mayor of London, announced a ban on alcohol on public transport in London. Some of you may have thought there was already a ban, as there is in New York. The first move by the new Tory mayor to tackle yobbery in the capital. Now, we're going to hear from Jackie Smith, the Home Secretary, in just a moment. But, Joe, haven't we heard a lot of this before from other Home Secretaries?
That's right, Andrew. In fact, back in 1997, Labour's manifesto promised to tackle the unacceptable level of crime on our streets. And they've been scrawling new initiatives to try and do this ever since. First, the then Home Secretary Jack Straw taught the country a new acronym, ASBO. He introduced antisocial behaviour orders to ban offenders from various misbehaviours. Then, hot on the heels of Tony Blair's headline-grabbing plan to march yobs to cash machines, came penalty notices for disorder, £80 fines for behaviour like public drunkenness. And the slogans kept coming. In his final years in power, Tony Blair tried to make his respect agenda the talk of the town. This included parenting orders to specify ways parents had to control their children. Have all these initiatives worked? Well, figures show that whilst overall levels of crime are down, antisocial behaviour remains a persistent problem. So what is Jackie Smith announcing today? Well, her big idea is frame and shame. That's getting the police to film and repeatedly stop identified persistent offenders. And she's also promised to set up an action squad to identify best practice across the country in combating antisocial behaviour. So is the writing on the wall for yobbish behaviour? Well, earlier I spoke to the Home Secretary and I started off by asking her whether today's announcement was an admission that the antisocial behaviour strategy of the last 11 years just hasn't worked.
No, it isn't, because actually in 9 out of 10 council areas people think that antisocial behaviour is being better tackled than it was. But it's saying that we still haven't done enough. Whilst there are still people who are concerned about their communities, whilst there are still some areas that aren't fully using the tools that we've put in place...
Why aren't they using those tools? And you've got breach rates of antisocial behaviour orders of 55%. That's a huge number of breaches on a key part of your strategy.
Well, the first thing to say is there are some areas where perhaps there isn't the expertise, or in some cases actually the local willingness to use them. That's why I'm setting up the antisocial behaviour squad, to help people to use them, but also to give a bit of challenge to those areas which haven't chosen to take up the tools that can make a difference to people's lives. On antisocial behaviour orders, the breach and the action that is taken in some ways is evidence of success of that antisocial behaviour order. Firstly, the majority of them actually do change people's behaviour. Secondly, they previously didn't exist at all. There was nothing we could do to stop people when they were behaving like that. Thirdly, if they are breached, there will be sanctions, there will be consequences.
But are you saying it's a success, though, to have a breach rate of 55% and on your behaviour orders, the ABCs, contracts, sorry, they are actually failing by 2/3 in under 18s. That's hardly a picture of success.
No, they're not failing by that rate. What actually independent reports have shown us is that 2/3 of people stop their antisocial behaviour when we make the first intervention, the warning letter or the acceptable behaviour contract. 2/3 stop at that point. Another 30% stop with the second or third intervention. There are 7% of offenders who persist after that. And that's why today in particular, I'm focusing my attention on those. I'm saying, what more can we do if somebody is persistently an antisocial behaviour perpetrator? And for example, I think we should be turning the tables on them through the sorts of projects we've seen in Essex, where the police followed people around, photographed them, made their life difficult. I think we should be following the example of Manchester, of Leicester, where they actually focus not just the police, but others on those individuals.
But taking the Essex case, where you're saying they're harassing, they're following, they're filming, is it legal?
Yes, it's legal, and what's more, the rights that I'm concerned about are the rights of people in our communities who are being harassed by those who can't.
So you're comfortable you won't be challenged on that? Because of course people will love that idea, it'll go down very well on estates where these sort of things are going on, but not then if it's going to be thrown back in your face.
Well, I don't believe it will be, and what's more, as I say, the rights that I'm interested in are those of the people whose lives are being made a misery. And I think there's more that we can do. Bringing in other agencies. If somebody's causing misery in their community, why don't we check whether or not they've got a licence for their TV, whether or not their car's taxed, whether or not their housing benefit claim is being made properly. All of those things can be brought together, as they have been in Manchester, to target persistent offenders.
This was a very small pilot scheme in Essex, used 14 police officers over 4 days. How would you roll that out nationally?
Well, it made a difference. I think one of the things I want the National Squad to do, which I'm going to be spending £250,000 on,
but that's a drop in the ocean. £250,000. The Conservatives said that would be 5 additional police officers.
Well, it'll make, I think, a big impact on the way in which the tools that are being used, not just by police officers, but by local councils, by housing providers, by others in localities, actually can have an impact. And incidentally, it is 25 times as much as was being spent last year on it. So I'm serious about making sure that the tools we've put in place, the teams that we've put in place can really have an impact.
So you will roll out this frame and shame operation that's been going on in Essex across the country. You're putting the resources.
There are already other police forces who want to use that in particular areas. I want to support them to do it. There are a whole range of other things that people might want to use and are in many places using. It's making sure that what works locally is actually being used, and what we know works in one area is at the very least known about in other areas.
What about tackling the causes of this antisocial behaviour? You're talking about obviously dealing with it once it's going on. We've had reports this week, high truancy rates, binge drinking amongst young people. What are you doing to tackle those, the causes of this antisocial behaviour that you're going on
One of
about?
the important things about the statistics that we're publishing today is that they actually show that those early interventions, parenting contracts where we provide support for parents, acceptable behaviour contracts where perhaps one of the things that we expect of a young person is that they do turn up at school or there'll be consequences, are actually being used more widely. So we're getting in earlier, we're nipping the behaviour in the bud, we're intervening earlier, and they're being successful.
That was the Home Secretary speaking to Joe earlier this morning. Now, we're joined by the Conservatives' Home Affairs spokesman James Brokenshire and by Anne Oakes-Odger, whose son was killed in a knife attack. She now campaigns on anti-social behaviour. I think a lot of viewers watching this will say, we've been here before, there are endless initiatives from the government. What we'd like to know is, what would the Tories do about it?
I think the main thing that we would do is actually put more police out on the streets, which I think really could make a very big difference in terms of cracking down on the antisocial behaviour and the crime that affects so many communities.
How would you do that, though? Everybody says you're going to do that. It's the default position of all politicians, more bobbies on the beat.
I think the point is, Andrew, is that the Home Secretary has made all of her statements this morning, but it's about deliverability. And what I mean by that is actually dealing with the stop form, the thing that adds to the bureaucracy, and also giving power to local communities to actually get the prioritisation and stopping this incessant bureaucracy, the targets that come from the centre that this week we've heard have led to some police forces treating things like low-level crime. Well, we shouldn't actually be recording it. We shouldn't be recording criminal damage. And that's because of those targets driven from the centre. We need to change that culture. And that will mean there will be more police on the street rather than, as we have at the moment, all the police back in the police station.
But are you going to have more police?
We'll keep that under review, but the main thing is actually ensuring that the police that we do have are used effectively. Because
keep it under review is such a politician's answer. But keep it under review.
The point, Andrew, is that we have police at the moment that are sitting there doing nothing. They're sitting in the police station. You look at the number of hours that are spent in terms of a police officer's day. It's not out on the streets where it needs to be, and it's not on the priorities that the local communities want. So it's all very well for the Home Secretary to talk today about all of these new things. She has no idea how she's going to deliver it, and I think this has just been a desperate policy just to create a headline rather than dealing with the underlying issues.
Right. I mean, they're sitting in the police station because it's dangerous out on the streets. Why would you want to go out in the streets if you can sit in the police station? Let's go to...
That underlines the point why we need them there.
Let's go to Anne Oakes-Odger, who's been patiently waiting there. Do you believe anything that politicians tell you on law and order these days?
Well, what I would say is this. I genuinely believe that Essex and Essex Police are leading the way in tackling the issue of knife crime, the issue of bullying, drugs and alcohol. But our most exciting project, which in fact this morning hundreds and hundreds of children have seen our show in Harlow. There'll be hundreds more children be seeing that show this afternoon. By the end of June, 15,000 Year 7 school children will have seen the Too Smart Roadshow, which addresses in the 2008 programme alcohol, bullying, drugs and knives, the whole cocktail of issues which often affect local communities.
Let me ask you this. You heard the Home Secretary speaking to Joe earlier there. What do you make of the Home Secretary's initiative? Do you think it's going to have any relevance on the streets?
Well, I think it's a rather short-term initiative, and for the same amount of costs. we could be rolling out the Too Smart Road Show on a national basis. We are looking, and we would ask the government to give us a 3-year funding for our project and roll this out nationally. We have families all around the UK that are in touch with me through knifecrimes.org who are willing to go in the schools and tell real stories to challenge young people.